He was the voice that comforted a nation. Yet the silence inside his own home was unbearable. Behind Bing Crosby's calm smile and Christmas cheer hid a father tormented by guilt, and sons who carried that burden until it destroyed them. When his private confession finally surfaced, it shattered the image of America's most beloved entertainer and revealed a truth too dark for his family to survive. What began as an admission of regret would end in heartbreak, suicide, and a legacy forever haunted by the sins of a father. The confession that haunts a legacy. In 1959, Bing Crosby, the man who had once been called America's voice, sat for an interview that would change how the world saw him forever. Decades of fame, wealth, and applause had made him untouchable, but that day, he said something no one expected. "I wasn't a good father," he admitted quietly. It was a rare moment of vulnerability from a man who had built his life on control. To the public, it sounded like humility. To his sons, it was a confession that reopened every wound they had tried to bury. Bing had spent his life mastering the art of presentation. On radio, his voice carried warmth. On screen, his presence radiated calm. But at home, those traits disappeared. He ruled his household with military precision, demanding obedience and punishing failure. He believed he was doing what was right, shaping his sons into strong men who would never break under pressure. But in trying to make them unbreakable, he broke them himself. The four boys, Gary, twins Dennis and Philip, and the youngest Lindsay, grew up under the constant shadow of greatness. Their father was not just famous, he was an institution. Every holiday, his voice filled living rooms across America. Every performance became a reminder that they could never measure up. The idea was to be ordinary, Gary later wrote, but Dad didn't seem to be an ordinary father. The discipline was harsh, the affection rare, and the expectations crushing. When Bing's wife, Dixie Lee, died in 1952 at just 42, the family's already fragile balance collapsed. She had been their mother, and in many ways, their shield, even as she battled her own demons of alcoholism and depression. After her death, the boys were left with a father who couldn't show emotion and a legacy they couldn't escape. Bing kept working, recording, filming, and performing as if nothing had happened. The world saw him as a model of resilience. His sons saw him as a stranger who could comfort millions but not his own family. So when that confession came years later, "I let them down," it was too late to heal what had already been destroyed. For the sons who had lived through his discipline and silence, the words were not redemption. They were a haunting reminder of everything they had lost. The truth had finally been spoken, but it carried a terrible weight, one that would echo long after Bing Crosby's voice fell silent. Gary Crosby, the son who spoke against the legend. Gary Crosby was the firstborn, and the first to rebel. Born on June 27, 1933, he inherited his father's looks, his voice, and his temper. To the public, Gary seemed destined to carry on the Crosby name. He sang on the Bing Crosby Show as a child, his soft tenor blending perfectly with his father's baritone. But behind the smiles and duets, Gary was living a very different story, one defined by fear and resentment. He often said that childhood in the Crosby house felt like boot camp. Each mistake was met with punishment, each success with a reminder that it wasn't good enough. "We got the belt," Gary recalled, "and we got it often." The image of the warm, gentle father America adored on radio was nowhere to be found at home. Bing demanded perfection from his sons, sometimes pushing them to tears during rehearsals. Gary once admitted that he could barely look at his father without feeling a mix of love and terror. When Gary became a young man, he tried to follow in Bing's footsteps. He recorded songs, acted in films, and joined his brothers in the Crosby Boys, a quartet that briefly toured the country. But every stage they stepped on reminded Gary that the audience wasn't there for him. They were there for Bing's sons. He wanted independence. What he got was comparison. His music career faded, and his acting roles in shows like Adam 12 and The Bill Dana Show never matched his father's fame. Behind the scenes, Gary turned to alcohol, using it to quiet the noise of expectations that had chased him since childhood. In 1983, 6 years after his father's death, Gary finally broke his silence. He released a memoir titled Going My Own Way, a book that stripped away the public image of Bing Crosby as America's perfect father. He wrote about the fear, the belt beatings, the emotional distance, and the pain that lingered long after childhood ended. He was a great entertainer, Gary wrote, but at home, he was cold. The revelation shocked the world. Fans accused Gary of betraying a national treasure. His uncle, band leader Bob Crosby, denied the claims, saying their family had always been disciplined but loving. But Gary stood by his story, insisting that the truth was long overdue. The book divided the family. Some brothers defended their father, others admitted that Gary was right. For Gary, the memoir wasn't revenge, it was release. "It was something I had to do," he said. Yet the pain didn't end there. In the years that followed, Gary's career dwindled, and his health declined. By the 1990s, he was struggling with lung cancer, and the same demons that had haunted his family came back one last time. He died in 1995 at 62, his life marked by both courage and tragedy, the son who dared to speak against a legend and paid the price for it. Lindsey Crosby, the youngest son's final breakdown. Lindsey Crosby was the baby of the family, born on January 5, 1938, when Bing's fame was already at its peak. To the world, he was the lucky one, the golden child of America's most admired entertainer. But growing up under the Crosby name was no blessing. Lindsey would later call it both his greatest gift and his greatest curse. Wherever he went, he wasn't just Lindsey. He was Bing Crosby's son. From the beginning, the expectations were impossible. He sang on his father's radio shows, acted in small parts, and joined his older brothers in the Crosby Boys. For a while, it seemed like they might carve out their own place in the spotlight. But the strain of living in his father's shadow was crushing. By the summer of 1962, Lindsey's mind and body began to give way. He suffered a nervous breakdown during a performance tour, collapsing under the weight of pressure and exhaustion. The group disbanded soon after, marking the beginning of Lindsey's long, painful decline. He tried to rebuild his life with acting, appearing in movies like Bigfoot and the Mechanic. But success never came. Hollywood wasn't kind to fading legacies, and Lindsey's reputation, marked by instability and alcoholism, made casting directors cautious. Behind closed doors, his personal life was falling apart. He married 3 times and had 5 children, but each marriage ended in heartbreak. Alcohol became his refuge, and depression became his constant companion. Friends said Lindsey's worst enemy was the ghost of his father, the pressure to live up to a man who never seemed satisfied. By the late 1980s, Lindsey's situation had grown desperate. His finances were deteriorating, and his mental health was fragile. In November 1989, he and his brothers received devastating news. The oil investments left by their late mother, Dixie Lee, had gone bankrupt. It was the last thread of stability they had, and now it was gone. Lindsey spiraled into despair. On December 11th, 1989, just days after learning of the financial collapse, he took his own life with a gun at his home in Calabasas, California. He was 51. Dennis Crosby, the brother who followed. Dennis Crosby was born just minutes apart from his twin brother Philip on July 13, 1934. From the outside, the twins seemed inseparable, handsome, talented, and raised in privilege. They were part of the Crosby Boys, performed on radio, appeared in movies, and carried the charm that seemed to run in their blood. But inside, Dennis was never at peace. He once said that living under the Crosby name was like standing in front of a spotlight that never goes off. It was exhausting, and for him, unbearable. Dennis had a quiet, introspective nature, the opposite of his outspoken brother Gary. He didn't enjoy being on stage. Performing made him anxious, and the constant comparisons to his father made it worse. "I guess I wasn't cut out to be an entertainer," he admitted years later. "I was always painfully self-conscious out there in the spotlight." Still, he tried. He appeared in films like Sergeants 3 and Say One for Me, and even acted alongside his father. But no matter what he did, he could never escape being Bing Crosby's son. That identity consumed him. Offstage, Dennis's life was filled with turbulence. His relationships reflected his struggle for stability. In 1958, he married model and showgirl Pat Sheehan, a woman who, in a cruel twist of fate, had briefly dated Bing himself. The marriage produced 2 sons, but ended in divorce after 4 years. He remarried twice more and had several more children, including a daughter, Denise, who later became known for her role in Star Trek: The Next Generation. Despite the growing family, Dennis's inner battles deepened. Alcohol became a daily companion, and his finances collapsed under the weight of failed business ventures and personal turmoil. Then came 1989. When Lindsay, the youngest and perhaps most sensitive of the 4 brothers, died by suicide that December, Dennis was shattered. He told friends that his brother's death broke something in him that could never be repaired. He carried the guilt of surviving and the fear that he was next. For 2 years he tried to move on, but the pain only deepened. On May 4th, 1991, Dennis Crosby was found dead in his home in California from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He was 56. Philip Crosby, the survivor who defended his father. Philip Crosby was the twin who lived longer and the one who refused to hate his father. Born alongside Dennis on July 13, 1934, he spent his life caught between loyalty and truth. He loved his brothers deeply but couldn't bring himself to condemn Bing the way Gary and Lindsay had. "We never got an extra whack we didn't deserve," Philip once told people in 1983. To him, discipline was part of their upbringing, not abuse. He believed the world had misunderstood his father, that Bing's sternness came from a time when strictness was seen as strength. Philip's life, like his brothers, began in music. He joined the Crosby Boys, performing harmonies that reminded the public of the Golden family on their father's radio shows. When the group fell apart after Lindsay's breakdown in 1962, Philip tried to keep performing. He appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show and even toured with Bob Hope, his father's old friend. He sang with an easy smile, but the applause never lasted. The music industry had moved on, and Philip's name only drew attention when linked to tragedy. Acting came next, small roles in movies like Robin and The Seven Hoods, and None But the Brave. It was work, but it was never fulfillment. Away from Hollywood, Philip's personal life was restless. He married 4 times and fathered several children. Friends said he was charming but wounded, always fighting to keep his life in order. Like his brothers, he battled alcoholism and depression, the family inheritance no one wanted. By the early 1980s, the Crosby name had become synonymous not just with fame, but with dysfunction. Then Gary's memoir, Going My Own Way, was released in 1983, exposing the family's darkest secrets. Philip was furious. To him, the book was betrayal. "Dad was a good man," he insisted. "I understood him better than anyone." But beneath the defiance was sorrow. Philip was the last of the 4 brothers to survive, carrying the weight of 3 funerals, 3 shattered lives, and decades of public judgment. He never denied his own struggles, admitting his battles with addiction and failed marriages. But he refused to let the world define his father only by pain. When Philip died in 2004 at the age of 69, his passing marked the end of the first Crosby generation. 4 brothers, 4 broken lives, all shaped by one man's pursuit of perfection and one confession that came too late. The second family, the children who escaped the curse. After the death of Dixie Lee in 1952, Bing Crosby remarried. His new wife, actress Katharine Grant, was more than 30 years his junior, vibrant, gentle, and eager to build a quieter life. Together they had 3 children, Harry Lillis III in 1958, Mary in 1959, and Nathaniel in 1961. For a time it seemed like Bing had learned from his past. Friends said Katharine brought light back into his world, and even Bing admitted privately that he had been too hard on his older sons. He tried to be different this time, softer, more present, more human. The younger Crosbys grew up in San Francisco, far from Hollywood's glare. They attended regular schools, played sports, and spent summers golfing with their father. "We thought we were normal kids," Harry later said. He was just Dad. Unlike the rigid household of Bing's first marriage, their home had laughter, music, and open affection. Bing encouraged curiosity rather than perfection. Still, he was cautious, aware of the damage his fame had already caused. "I want them to stay out of show business," he once told a reporter. "I want them to have a life." That life turned out to be very different. Harry became an investment banker, earning a business degree from Fordham and a master's in drama from the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art. Mary became an actress, best known as Kristen Shepherd on Dance. Where Gary saw cruelty, Harry saw structure. It's as if Bing's confession in 1959 had changed him. Not for his reputation, but for his redemption. He could not undo the pain he had caused his first family, but he could try to prevent it from repeating. For a man who built his life on second chances, that was his quiet act of atonement. What do you think? Was Bing Crosby a man trapped by his era, or a father who simply refused to see the damage his perfection caused? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more true stories behind Hollywood's brightest and darkest legends.